My name's Jan Rather. I'm the Infrastructure Engagement Manager in the Mayor's Office. I'll be co-presenting with Paige Anderson, Project Manager, and George Barrow, Principal Planner. My colleague Drew here is running Zoom for folks, and Chastity Bay from the Mayor's Office is y'all's neighborhood coordinator. Also want to let the councilman, I don't know if you want to say a couple words, but
strip there. Yeah, I'll be very quick. Just want to say that I'm excited that this project is happening. There's clearly a severe need for something to be done on 18th Street. I was excited when Domi came to me with an idea that we're going to be able to start something here. You know, I know that everyone has hopes and dreams for a lot of things on 18th Street. I think this will be probably the first step in that, and I'm excited to see all this engagement here. That's pretty awesome for a really hot Tuesday night. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll be around the rest of the night.
Thanks, Councilman. Also just want to give a quick shout out to our City Channel folks who are recording this meeting so that it's viewable online, and also City Park staff that are staffing this as a cooling center as well on these hot days. So thank you to both of those folks. Their work, I think, often goes unrecognized, but we really appreciate them making stuff like this possible. So real quick, our meeting norms. First and foremost is your physical and psychological safety. Go over that a little bit. Obviously, we've got a space that's air conditioned. I'm really thankful for that. We didn't have to cancel or postpone. We want you to listen to learn. It might be a little bit challenging to listen. I hear there's a girls' basketball game upstairs. We'll try and speak up at the tables. We've got plenty of staff in the back, so try and find somebody to talk to. If you have disagreements, we ask that you do so respectfully. Y'all are, after all, one another's neighbors. Appreciate differences. Be open to new ideas. You're going to see some new ideas. You're going to hear some new ideas. We'll try and do the same as the city. And then, obviously, be present. We've got some exits here to my left, the door that I think most of y'all came in. First aid location, I assume, is in this back office. And then we do have somebody here who is CPR certified. If somebody here has a medical emergency, I've got my phone. I'll be the one to call 911. Just wave and shout and get my attention. For folks on Zoom, we just ask that you remain muted. We will be having a sort of online engagement for you all after the presentation, where you'll be able to ask questions, and there will be a Domi staffer online there as well. Use the chat function. You should also be able to just verbally speak up after the presentation. So why we're all here is to share the safety context and planned improvements along the South 18th Street corridor between East Carson Street and Monastery Avenue. And this is just a little bit of a project background. So in 2017, Domi installed the first quick build traffic calming measures, and the first quick build bump out was installed at South 18th and Mary. In 2020, the Bike Plus plan identified a connection from the Southside Flats through Southside Park to Sabre Way, and then South 18th Street. That Bike Plus connection has been determined to be infeasible just because of some grade changes through the park, and so looking at making that connection on the street. There's been a number of related projects to this project that sort of tie in at various extents. So there's the South 18th Street Trail Connector with advisory bike lanes that brings it from the Three Rivers Heritage Trail to Carson Street. This spring, the South 18th Street steps were reconstructed, and the South 18th Street sidewalk gap was closed. There's also been changes to the Josephine Street intersection, adding a signal. Some additional context: in 2024, the city committed to Vision Zero and published the High Injury Network. I'll be talking about that in a second. We also secured funding for Vision Zero projects. We chose this project as the 2025 corridor project. Started doing data collection, virtual engagement. Some of you have probably been on the Engage PGH page, and now we're here collecting more feedback from folks. So some of you, well, hopefully a lot of you have heard about Vision Zero. It's been a pretty big publicity effort of the city over the last year, but this really comes on the heels of a worsening traffic crash epidemic. In 2024, 21 people died in crashes on Pittsburgh streets. And between 2019 and 2023, crashes involving vulnerable road users, those are cyclists and pedestrians, rose 40%. The 2024 data does show that we might be starting to turn a corner there. The number of crashes involving vulnerable road users in 2024 was actually below the number in 2019. I don't think that's a long enough trend to say we've definitely turned a corner, though. We also know we can improve safety by lowering vehicle speeds. And so you'll see here this graph, the likelihood of death for people walking if hit at these speeds. So 8% at 20 miles per hour goes up to 46% at 40 miles per hour. And so one of the key efforts that DOMI and the city have been undertaking is slowing down our city streets. So I talked a little bit about the high injury network. The high injury network is the 10% of roads in the city of Pittsburgh responsible for 83% of all serious injury crashes. 79% of pedestrian crashes and 62% of all bicycle crashes. You'll see on here that South 18th Street between Carson and Monastery is highlighted on that high injury network, as is Carson. This data, just a comment about Carson, was based on crash data, or in large part on crash data from 2019 to 2023. Some of the changes that happened on the north section of South 18th Street and Carson Street took place in 2022 and 2023. And so we expect to see improvement in some of those places already based on prior changes. Real quick, before I move on, I just want to make a quick note about Vision Zero. These were at the registration table. This is our Vision Zero community agreement. And so, we know that as the city of Pittsburgh, we have a responsibility to help make sure our roads are safe. But this is also, an agreement from our community members to do things like put down your phone while you're driving, drive at safe speeds, yield to pedestrians. And we are also using it as a way to get in touch with people, keep them updated about Vision Zero. So you can tear off this little back part of the slip, leave it at the registration, and we'll collect it and add you to our contact information. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to George to talk about the project context.
All right, thanks, Jan. My name is George Barrow, principal planner with DOMI. And here we see our project context. You'll see that it actually matches the extent of South 18th that were on that high injury network from the slide before. That is why the corridor terminates at Monastery Ave rather than continuing all the way up to perhaps Arlington. So you'll see it goes from Carson uphill to Monastery. Uphill is up on this map. And the goal of the project is to calm traffic, improve safety on South 18th for all users, especially pedestrians, transit riders, and cyclists, and then to provide the bike connection called for in the Bike Plus plan.
Can you speak up and have more time?
Okay, I will speak up.
Try turning this. Turn it to what you added. You want to say something?
Test, test, test.
Is that too loud?
Is that okay?
Is that okay?
Better? Okay. Sorry. I'm a bit soft-spoken, I realize that. All right, so on this slide, we see some of the crash history along South 18th Street. Previously, we mentioned that it's on that high injury network, but here we have a bit more detail. This is a heat map of sorts of where those crashes are happening. You'll notice a few things on that map. some high rates of crashes, particularly at intersections and at curves along 18th. So in the flats at that top part of the map over by Carson, you'll see at intersections. And note again that this is crash data up from 2019 to 2023. And so there are actually improvements already in place at Sarah Street and Jane Street, where you see those crash concentrations, as well as some improvements at East Carson itself. Those were concrete curb extensions and signal upgrades that were completed just a few years ago. So those improvements were not in place when this crash data was captured. But along the rest of the corridor, where it goes up the hill, you'll see particularly high rates of crashes at those curves, particularly around Mission, Gregory, and then at St. Patrick, just downhill from Monastery. Slide advancing is not working for me, sorry. All right. So given all of that context, we started going out and walking the corridor, of course. So just a few things that we spotted on our very cold January walks of South 18th Street were some obstructed sidewalks. There's a lot of sidewalk parking on this corridor. As well as, I want to point out on that bottom left image, you can see some serious damage to vehicles parked along South 18th Street, perhaps showing why people are feeling that they need to park on the sidewalk right now. These vehicles being parked on South 18th are frequently being sideswiped. So a lot of damaged vehicles, lots of pieces of vehicles along 18th on our field walks. Next slide, please. Wanted to show some of our review of traffic data along the corridor. And there's a lot of numbers here, but I want to point out those two numbers in red. Those are the 85th percentile speed. 85th percentile speed is a sort of a traffic engineering measure for, it's the speed at which people feel comfortable driving on the street. What you see here is that the 85th percentile speed between Patrick and Sabre on South 18th is 36 miles an hour. That is despite a 25 mile an hour speed limit. So what this is showing is a demonstrated speeding issue. And we reviewed existing transit ridership. I wanted to include this slide to quickly shout out the Route 51, which is along South 18th Street, is actually the highest ridership bus in PRT's system. Tons of people are taking the bus along South 18th, particularly along this corridor. Not so many people are getting on and off. A lot of people are just riding through. But a lot of people are getting on and off at Carson. You can see those are in the 300s for average daily weekday ons and offs of the bus. And then at a couple more highlights at Sarah, and then Pius and Mission, and then all the way up at the top at Monastery, there are quite a few people getting on and off the bus as well. So making sure people can board and get off the bus and cross the street to access bus stops is a priority for this project. We also collected some bike counts. We went out there and installed a bike counter. And what we saw was, on average, around 100 bikes a day on South 18th. That's despite pretty much no bike infrastructure on that street as it stands. So it's a demonstration that people are biking on this street. It's an important connection for the bike network, even though it's currently not a very comfortable one. Next slide. So we did some online engagement, largely through the Engage PGH website, which you can see here. Next slide. Some brief numbers about how many people we had engaging with those online materials. We had 696 unique visitors to the website, and then 60 unique contributors to the website. Those are people who answered our surveys and other questions. We had a window of survey from when the project launched around in January until sometime in March was when we closed the survey. We will be reopening those surveys after this meeting, and there will be opportunity to leave more online engagement after this. So I wanted to summarize some major themes from that online engagement. The top one that we saw most frequently were speeding concerns. Also, there was a lot of desire for a climbing bike lane. There was lots of notes about persistent damage to parked cars and feeling of danger of parking along 18th. Lots of stories of near-miss experiences, and those were for drivers, for people walking along 18th, lots of people cycling along 18th. Lots of near misses and stories of crashes. Some serious personal stories were included in these comments. Lots of notes of parked cars blocking the sidewalks. So lots of obstructed sidewalks making walking very difficult. Bad visibility at driveways and intersections due to the strange geometry of this corridor and lots of elevation change. Dangerous passing behavior, that's related to the speeding, of course, but yeah, people are being very impatient on 18th and they want to speed around other people. Red light running, especially at Mission Street. This was one that was highlighted as a location with persistent red light running. Difficulty crossing South 18th to access bus stops, and those were both PRT bus stops as well as school bus stops, which we have those up and down 18th, particularly shouted out as a difficult one to access where the stops near Monastery have at the top of the corridor. And finally, the need to balance traffic calming measures with emergency response access. So we'll talk about this a bit more later, but there is a firehouse at the bottom of this corridor on 18th in the flats, and 18th serves as a primary emergency response access route up into the slopes. And so emergency response vehicles are frequently using this corridor up and down to respond to emergencies. And so any kind of traffic calming measure that we implement needs to be taking that into account and balancing that with emergency response access. Next slide, please. And one of the last things we did for our planning phase was a community walkthrough. This was a walk back at the beginning of March, where we invited representatives from a few different community stakeholder groups, which I wanted to shout out, the Southside Slopes Association, the Southside Smart Streets, Pittsburgh Regional Transit, PRT, City Council District 3, we had the council member there, the Office of the Mayor, and the Department of City Planning. We heard lots of similar themes in this walkthrough as we did in the online engagement, particularly speeding, pedestrian crossing safety, accessibility challenges posed by the sidewalk parking, poor signage for upcoming curves and pedestrian crossings, and then confusing intersection geometries and poor sightlines. And that brings me to the design phase, where I'll hand it off to Paige.
Thanks, George. My name is Paige Anderson. I am a project manager in the traffic engineering group. Yes. So like I said, I'm a traffic engineer, project manager on the Vision Zero team, and George did a great job working with the community, and now our group's taking it over through design. Just so you guys, I know you guys have seen this before, but the orientation of all of these, as you can see from, if you look at the back map, it's a very topsy-turvy corridor, so the orientation kind of changes throughout this. I'm gonna do my best to move slowly and kind of explain the orientation. Could I have that, is there a laser? Oh, there it is. Laser. Let's see if it works. Oh no, it doesn't want to work on the TV, I don't think. It doesn't work on the TV. Okay, I will point. So first, we're in the flats. We're starting at Carson Street to Edward Street. I guess I'll take a step back and say that this is the initial conceptual design that planning worked with us to come up with, but we are still going to be going through the rest of the design and engineering phase. So this is a proposal. We'll have plenty of opportunity to hear your feedback on specific details, but there's plenty of things that could change between this proposal and what you end up seeing on the road, especially smaller details. But I'll walk you through what we think could work from what we've heard so far. So starting at Carson, I'll mention we already did extend the leading pedestrian interval, LPI, the jump that the pedestrians get at the signal. During the walkthrough, it came up that it was a little fast. At Carson, I think it was 3 seconds, and we already adjusted that to a 5-second LPI at Carson. Additionally, we will be proposing additional painted bump outs with flex posts throughout the corridor. You'll see this on every slide. Updated crosswalks. Here at the fire station, we're proposing a do not block the box for their pavement markings. We've done this at other places in the city. And then the first speed table approaching the hill as you head that way. So you'll see it right here. This is the base of the hill. This is Edwards Way. A speed table is a lot like a speed hump, but they're a little bit wider, and so they're easier for buses, they're easier for emergency vehicles, but they still slow down cars, just not quite as much as a speed hump, which we would save for more of a residential, quieter back road. So here, I know there's actually, I realized after that this is the location that already has painted bump outs, but I provided another example, more recent example from Lawrenceville to kind of show a zoomed in, because I know it's hard to see, of just what it looks like in the plan, and then an example from another place in the city. So here we're moving up the corridor at the beginning of the hill. The orientation is changing. So this is the uphill direction from left to right. You'll see this is where the bike lane is proposed, the bike climbing lane. So it's just one bike lane on the uphill direction. Sharrows in the downhill direction. And so you can see that along this curve. It's much easier to see on the posters in the back. We also, some completed things that we already did is that we extended the LPI on Mission Street, like we did on Carson, again from 3 to 5 seconds. And then we heard a demand from the community walkthrough about the sidewalk around this curve. There's a large gap. Domi was already working on the steps project there. So while we were there, we actually were able to close that sidewalk gap very quickly. We kind of took the opportunity. So right now, we already built the sidewalk along this first gap around the curve. So you can see that today. I have some photos coming. And then the trade-offs for this is that in order to fit that climbing lane, we're going to be going down from 2 lanes of parking to 1 lane of parking. So on this side, all of the no parking through Josephine is already there. But then on the outer curve, is where we're proposing removing the parking, so that way we can, you'll see that the parking lane switches sides throughout the corridor, and that is because we wanted to prioritize the parking on the side with the most residences whenever we could. So that starts here around this curve on the inside. Next slide. So here is an example from Stanton Ave. This is another project Domi installed a few years ago on Stanton Ave in Stanton Heights. It's very similar to this, so if you wanted to go and see an example, it's very similar in that it has a bike climbing lane. In this case, you can see it here, as well as something similar to speed tables, and then slow curve packages. So there's transverse markings that kind of create that rumble, slow curve markings on both sides approaching the curves, and there's of course a bike climbing lane as well. So that's a good example from Google Earth imagery. And so here is the completed sidewalk gap. You can see before, nothing at the bottom of those from the steps out. So today, this beautiful new sidewalk. All right, we're moving on to the third section. We're moving up the hill from around just past Mission and Gregory Street up through Sabre Way. I know there is some painted refuge island here that would get adjusted and updated, so we'd be adding more, maybe better vertical elements. We haven't gone into material selection yet, but we'd be looking at another slow curve package approaching as the curves continue, another speed table, the bike climbing lane, updated crosswalks, and painted bump outs. I'll mention too with the speed tables, this concentration is not as high of a concentration as you sometimes might see on typical traffic calming corridors. They're more targeted here. So I think there's 6 along the corridor, which is a lot less than you might see on a typical traffic calming project. The reason for that is, one, we're trying to find a balance with emergency vehicles. And we think a good way to approach that is and also we have limited budget, if I'm being honest. So what we're trying to do is prioritize the areas that have the highest crash rates. So you'll see those speed tables line up pretty frequently with the slow curve packages, and all of the pavement markings and elements that come around the curves is where most of the proposed speed tables are. And so as we move our way higher on the hill, you'll see a lot of the same things. I encourage you all to look at the back to see more detail, because you can, especially if this is an area that concerns you, because this is some good examples of the shifting the parking lane back and forth. I think with the curves of the street, I'm curious what it would feel like driving. We've done a lot of shifting on projects like this in other areas of the city, but this is a very unique corridor, so I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. But a lot of the same things you see here, a pedestrian refuge island at St. Patrick's Street, which is one of the access to the park, another slow curve package, another speed table, continuing the bike climbing lane. On the areas where it's not the same side as parking, there may be opportunities to introduce protected bike lane elements like flex posts, and of course updated crosswalks and painted bump outs. And this is the top of the hill, not the top of the hill, but the top of the hill for this scope. And this ends at Monastery Ave, or just through Monastery Ave. We would tie it back in. And so this intersection these intersections are very interesting, I'm sure, as many of you are aware. We are proposing, there's not a pedestrian refuge island on this photo, that's my bad. But bump outs, crosswalks, things to improve sight lines. We saw a lot, and another speed table around this curve. And the speed table, actually, I forgot to write this down, but we're proposing incorporating it as a raised crosswalk. We think that this is a good location. I know there's a lot of transit ridership, it sounds like, here. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then what we are proposing tonight that we would like to hear your feedback on is making these Monastery Place and Monastery Ave one-way each. If you could go to the next slide. I showed some more detail. The direction that we are considering is perhaps maybe not exactly what you would expect. We think that we can provide the most safety by choosing this directions. So you'd be coming down this way and up this way. And the reason for that, and we can dive in more if you are interested in talking more about this intersection, but the reason is basically that if you were to go the opposite direction and have this uphill, they would be able to move very quickly through here without having to cross any traffic. And we think that that would create a more dangerous condition than making this harder turns. So if you're coming down, you have to cross the oncoming vehicles, stop and look both ways, and then go down. So we think the sight lines will be best. The traffic will move the slowest if the one-ways go in this direction. So that is our proposal. But we do expect that emergency vehicles in emergency situations may want to go against the one-ways because they want to move as fast as possible through these intersections. So that is a trade-off, potentially, with this configuration. And that is the end of the slide. I'll let Jan talk about what's next.
Thanks, everybody. So yeah, with that, I think we'll move into the roll plots. Thanks, everybody.